So I want to talk about the best competitive Pokemon teams for the 2016 series because the World Championships are coming up in August.
They're going to be here.
Yeah.
They're going to be
So
in San
exciting.
Francisco.
Yeah.
IGN is going to be there. So if you see us, say hi if you're around. But there's been some rule changes this series. So last year, there were no legendaries around. This year they reintroduced 2 legendaries per team. There used to be kind of like limited Pokemon that you weren't allowed to use, and I think that began around 2010. And so they basically said, okay, you can use legendaries again, but not like Mew, because there's legendary Pokemon and then there's like mythical Pokemon.
Yeah.
So you can use certain legendaries and they have a list, and you can only use 2 from the list and all this stuff.
Okay.
But basically that really changed the landscape of competitive for me. Just thinking about how hard it is to obtain a competitive legendary, doing all of the resetting to get a Pokemon that will work. So looking at the team so far, especially from the U.S. Nationals, I want to focus on the U.S. Nationals because that's sort of the environment that we're going to be used to here, especially in San Francisco, and the one that I'm always watching because I find it very interesting.
Nice.
But the Masters division, so there's 3 divisions in competitive Pokemon, if you don't know. Masters, which is I think 17 or 16 and above. So Masters is usually like older teenagers and 20-somethings, and then senior and junior divisions.
Junior's so cute,
Junior
by the way.
division.
Yeah.
Junior's-
Cutest division by far.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
kids are smart
Yes.
too.
It's so
Agree.
impressive to see how deep they dove into Pokemon, because like when I was there, it's just like, nah, man, I caught the Pikachu.
You get your
I'm
Charizard,
good.
and there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
12 Pikachus.
well, yeah, 12 on a team. But yeah, on that note, talking about the teams people are using, because I do think it's really, really interesting knowing that introduced legendaries. I mean, last year, 2015 teams were very limited. You saw a lot of Cresselia, a lot of Mega Kangaskhan, a lot of Smeargle, and you're seeing a lot of that
They're
still.
back, surprise.
They're back. So the Master Division champion, Chase Liebert, I hope I'm saying that right, he had 6 to choose from. In competitive Pokemon, you bring 6, and you get to see your opponent's 6, and then you choose 4 for a doubles battle.
Got it.
So you don't always know which Pokemon your opponent chose. So in every one of his 3 matches against his opponent, he brought in Mega Kangaskhan, Xerneas, Groudon, and Cresselia. So Xerneas, Groudon was a super popular legendary duo. Almost every team utilized at least one of those, a lot of them together, because they just synchronize really well.
Sure.
And he actually struggled a lot in that match. So I watched the whole match. The three different games, he lost the first one.
Okay.
Just totally like kind of
wrecked, kinda.
fantastically. Yeah. The opponent had Smeargle and Groudon also.
Okay.
Salamence, he used Mega Salamence, and a Bronzong for Trick Room.
Got it.
So they each had a Trick Room setter. Trick Room is really, really popular. If you don't know, Trick Room swaps the speed, so the slowest Pokemon will move first.
Nice. It's a way to mess with your opponent for sure.
Yeah. And the problem, and you saw them sort of predicting this in this match, is if you have a Trick Room setter on each team, it's a game of, am I going to use Trick Room or is he going to use Trick Room?
Yeah.
And that happened in, I think, game 2 of their match, where the opponent had, his name was Aaron, he had a Bronzong out, and Chase has a Cresselia out, and you're like, who's going to use Trick Room? Because if one of you uses Trick Room, then you're screwed. But if both of you use Trick Room, then you've just nullified each other and
Exactly,
wasted
yeah.
turn for that Pokemon. So what he ended up doing is actually switching Cresselia out and turning the tide of the match. So that's the big thing is, it's not just breeding, it's not just picking the strongest legendaries, it's all about how you play them.
Yeah, strategy is super important, and like making sure you can counter your opponent's strategy is very challenging too.
Yeah, so one of the things is the Cresselia he chose, instead of bringing Bronzong for Trick Room, Bronzong was probably the most popular Trick Room setter that I saw. He brought Cresselia because it was more effective versus Groudon, and that paid off because the opponent had Groudon, not Xerneas. People were choosing Bronzong for a Xerneas counter.
Got it.
And so this is that whole metagame isn't just the actual match you're playing, it's also, okay, the Pokemon I'm bringing, I have to think about what my opponents are bringing, and I wanted to highlight one of the unique teams we saw that actually did really well.
These are always the most exciting because the meta always narrows down the player pool so much. It's just like, okay, well, you're going to see these Pokemon, and you're going to see these Pokemon again, and again, and again.
Yeah.
And then the person who comes out says, no, I'm going to do something different.
Just like the Pachirisu
the
that
best.
just took
Yes,
it
yeah,
all like a couple of years
exactly.
ago.
That's what you're always so excited to see, though, because like you want to see people get creative with their teams,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so in addition to looking out for the Groudons and the Xerneases and the Cresselias, you want to try to look out for wild cards. And so one competitor, Alan Chambers, used Kyogre and Rayquaza as his 2 legendaries, which was really rare. The advantage, of course, to using Kyogre or Groudon is that they have primal reversion, so it's like having a 3rd mega option. You get a couple mega options.
Right.
It's like having an extra mega.
Okay.
And then having Rayquaza, he didn't use Mega Rayquaza always. He had Mega Gengar, and Mega Gengar is really cool and wasn't seen anywhere else in the Masters Division finalists. Because it has Shadow Tag. So once you have a Mega Gengar out, your opponent can't switch. And switching, like we saw with the competition, I mean, when Chase had to do a very strategic switch on his Cresselia, and he wouldn't have been able to do that against this Gengar.
Yeah.
So that's a really sneaky move. He also had Crobat, which I haven't seen used in years. I was so stoked. Crobat is like one of the fastest Pokemon there is. I love Crobat so much.
Yeah.
And so for someone to bring out a Crobat in this, it was just really, really cool to see.
Means business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he had Thundurus, which was really popular in the last 2015 series. Thundurus and Landorus both are super popular because they're pseudo-legendaries. They're very powerful.
So has the Kangaskhan train finally left the station?
No,
Mega
that's
Kangaskhan still-
here to stay for a while, probably.
Chase led with his Mega Kangaskhan every match.
That's the one that
Mega-
everyone was ripping their hair out over 2 years ago, a
Mega
year ago.
Kangaskhan my fave.
Yeah.
I love my
I'm
Kangaskhan.
staying.
Yep.
And I was so proud because my Kangaskhan has the same moveset as Chase's Kangaskhan. She was like, I trained a good Kangaskhan.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm really excited to see once we get to the World Championships. So just wrapping this up and going into what to expect from these teams from the World Championships at the end of August. I'm excited to see the Japan teams come in.
Are they the more creative, like what you
Well,
say?
it's just a different set of metagame. I mean, the metagame is very specific to, like, just from everything we've learned from the U.S. Nationals, you're predicting what your opponent's going to bring, you're predicting what your opponent's going to do in the match, and trying to predict wildcard Pokemon. And you're doing that for the U.S. first, if you're a U.S.
That's
player.
the style of play, right? Like
Yeah.
just
That's how
Versus
you get
overseas trends, which may not make their way over here. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. Last year, my favorite player to watch was actually the juniors champion, Kotone.
Oh, she was so good.
She was really good. One of
Yeah.
the only female competitors in the whole thing.
Yep.
So proud of her. She comes out with like this shiny mega Gardevoir, like she was perfect. And
She
it was,
dominated, if I remember right. Yeah.
She wrecked.
Like really.
Yeah, and it's important because the U.S. teams weren't really using Mega Gardevoir. I mean, they were sticking with like Mega Kanga, and from what I remember, and she was a very uncommon Pokemon to use. Or I guess it doesn't always have to be she, but she wears a beautiful ball gown. So
yeah.
but it's really, really cool because you get that extra element, and that's part of what makes the best players the best. Is they're thinking about overseas challengers as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to watch all the metagames.
You gotta watch a lot.
Gotta see
just the championship match between Chase and Aaron was 30 minutes.
Wow.
So it's a lot. I mean, I riveted the whole time.
Yeah.
But what are you guys excited to see from the World Championships, just to finish up?
I always just want that surprise Pokemon, like who is going to bring something unique. That's always what I'm looking for. Like everyone plays to the meta, and people who break out from that are always the most interesting, I think. Even if they lose, I just want to see what they do and how they counter the meta.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you both. I feel like it's always just that surprise of no one was thinking of this before it showed up. I feel like that's what happened at least with Pachirisu a few years ago, where I was like, wait, no person I think there. And he had his little plushie, by the way, on the table as well. But there's just always that dynamic of like, you don't know what to expect. The overseas players are going to bring it. And I feel like that's true of every competitive meta I've seen, any game that's played at a global scale. When Japan shows up, Japan will pull out a character that sometimes you're just like, wait, what? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
So,
no one here's using that. What are you doing?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully there's some big surprises over there.
Absolutely.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Let us know what you think in the comments on Twitter and Facebook. This is an experimental show, so make sure you share because we want to keep making these. We want to know what you think. Thank you so much, Miranda and Jose, for joining me.
Absolutely.
I hope you guys had fun. We'll see you next time. Bye.